Today, we're going to unpack a really powerful tool for any business, direct materials variances. Now, I know it sounds a little formal, but stick with me. This is where you get to be a detective, figuring out the real story behind your costs and what's actually happening in your operations. So, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the scene of the crime, where your perfect plans meet the messy reality. Then we'll meet our two main suspects, the price variance and the quantity variance. We're going to interrogate each one separately before we bring it all together to crack the case. All right, let's set the stage. Every business, big or small, starts with a budget, right? A plan. It's your blueprint for how things are supposed to go. But as anyone who's ever run anything knows, the second that plan makes contact with the real world, things get interesting. And that's the big question, isn't it? You budgeted a certain amount for your materials, but when the bills come in, the number is different. Maybe it's higher, maybe it's lower. But the real mystery is, why? That gap between what you expected and what you got is exactly what we're here to solve. To get to the bottom of this, you have to understand that total difference, well, it isn't just one story. It's actually two totally separate clues that we need to investigate. So, the total difference in your material costs really breaks down into these two main pieces, a price variance and a quantity variance. Think of it this way. One tells you if you paid the right price for your stuff, and the other tells you how efficiently you used that stuff. First up, we've got the price variance, and honestly, it's pretty much what it sounds like. Did you pay more or less per pound, per gallon, whatever, for your raw materials than you thought you would? It's all about the cost per item. Simple as that. Now, the other side of that coin is the quantity variance. You'll sometimes hear this called an efficiency or usage variance. This one has nothing to do with price. It's all about how much material you used. For the number of widgets you actually made, did you use more raw material or less than the plan called for? This really gets to the core of how efficient your production process is. Okay, let's grab our magnifying glass and take a closer look at that first clue, the price variance. This is all about the cash you laid out. So, how do we figure this out? Well, don't let the formula intimidate you. It's actually pretty straightforward. We just take the difference between the price you really paid and the price you planned to pay. Then, we multiply that difference by how many units you bought. The whole point of this calculation is to isolate the impact of just the price, nothing else. Now this is where it gets really interesting. A favorable variance means you paid less than you planned. Awesome, right? Your purchasing team might be geniuses at negotiating. Or maybe you just bought cheaper, lower quality junk that's going to cause you headaches down the road. On the other hand, an unfavorable variance means you paid more. That could be a bad deal, sure. Or it could have been a smart strategic choice to buy better materials. See? The labels favorable and unfavorable barely tell you anything. So, when you're trying to figure out what happened with the price variance, the first door you're going to knock on is the purchasing departments. The purchasing manager is the one who's ultimately on the hook for sourcing materials at the right price. Okay, on to our second clue, the quantity variance. Remember, this has nothing to do with price. This is all about how well your team used the materials they were given. The way we calculate this is super important. We look at how much material you actually used versus how much you should have used for what you produced. Then, and this is the secret sauce, we multiply that difference by the standard price. Using the standard price is key because it strips away any price fluctuations and lets us focus purely on how efficient production was. And just like with the price variance, the story here has layers. A favorable quantity variance means you used less material than planned. Fantastic, your team is a well-oiled machine. Or are they cutting corners and the product quality is suffering? An unfavorable variance means you used too much material. Could be waste, could be inefficiency. But look at that last point. It could also be the direct result of using those cheap materials that the purchasing team got that favorable price on. You see how these two are connected? For this one, accountability usually rests with the production supervisor. They're the ones in charge of the people and the machines turning raw materials into finished products. Managing waste and efficiency on the line, that's their world. All right, this is the best part. Enough with the theory, let's see how this works in the real world. This is where you see how these two variances play off each other to tell the complete story. Let's meet Chow Down Inc. Now, this table might look like a lot, but we only need to look at a couple of key numbers. Their plan was to pay $6.75 per unit of material, but they actually paid $7. At first glance, that doesn't sound great, but let's see what the variance calculations tell us. First, let's look at their price variance.
Oof, it's almost $27,000 unfavorable. They definitely paid more for their materials than they budgeted. On paper, that does not look good for the purchasing manager. But then you look at the quantity variance, and whoa, it is a massive $111,000 favorable. What this means is they used way less material than they'd planned to make their products. The production team looks like absolute rock stars.
And right here, this is where we connect the dots and solve the case. An unfavorable price variance happening at the same time as a huge favorable quantity variance? That's a classic sign of a strategic move. Chowdown probably made a conscious decision to pay a little more for higher quality materials, and that bet paid off, big time, with way less waste on the production line. And the final result? The bottom line? Even though they paid more per unit, Chowdown came out ahead with an overall favorable variance of more than $84,000. It's the perfect example of how an unfavorable number was actually part of a really, really good business decision. So, what's the big lesson here? Well, first off, these variances are diagnostic tools, not just scorecards for playing the blame game. The words favorable and unfavorable can be seriously misleading, so you always have to dig deeper. And most importantly, they show you the hidden trade-offs that are constantly happening between your different departments, like purchasing and production. At the end of the day, variance analysis gives you answers to the question, what happened? But its real power is that it forces you to ask much better questions. Questions about strategy, about quality, and about how well your teams are actually working together to get the best result for the entire company. And that, my friends, is a story worth uncovering.